welcome and challenging news to you. And you're in the middle of things. Uh, I'm just going to let you give us your observations so far of what's happened over the last week and how that affects VHCB and how best to move forward with these federal dollars in VHCB's opinion. And I'd like you to also, Josh kept referring to um, all these plans that are in place.
Mm.
I don't think he was talking about the equivalent of shovel ready, but maybe one step back from that, that there's been a lot of work put into the putting a deal together. And I'm trying to understand where VHCB fits in that deal. Are you the last step? I know you have these monthly or quarterly meetings where you allocate the monies that the state and other entities have given the board. Um, is that generally the last step in putting the green lighting the project? So try and educate us a little bit.
Good morning, everyone. Jen Holler. I'm the Policy Director for the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. What an incredibly exciting and challenging time it is in the world of housing. We've been so focused on the people who've been displaced and are temporarily located in motels. And with your support with CRF funding, we were able to make a good dent in that and moved hundreds of people out of motels and into permanent housing, about 250 units across the state. Unfortunately, they were replaced by other individuals and families who had lost their homes. And now we are dealing with historic numbers of folks who are in motels. And I couldn't agree more with what Commissioner Hanford is saying, is that the amount of money that we need to expend to keep people safe, which is absolutely necessary, the sooner we can transition that sort of funding and move that towards permanent homes and long-term investments, the better. So the governor's proposal, yes.
May I just ask a question? I mean, it's just astonishing to me. I mean, we had 2,500 people, 2,500 Vermonters that we housed in a heartbeat at the beginning of the pandemic. I would just love to know what is with our eviction stay, so people are not hopefully being evicted from their homes right now. What is adding to the ranks of the homeless now? I mean, how are these numbers growing at such a rate? Is, I guess, my question, because you're saying the numbers of homeless are replacing the homeless that we have found new homes for, or we've built and transitioned them, and yet we're filling up with more homeless people. Why are they now homeless if we still have our eviction stay in place?
I think somebody from the Department of Children and Families or the Office of Economic Opportunity is going to be able to speak to that more directly, or even somebody from the local continuums of care. I mean, my sense is there are a lot of people who have a place to live, but it's not necessarily an apartment or a home with a long-term lease. And, their ability to scrape together whatever money it takes in order to continue to pay for that unit isn't necessarily protected by the eviction moratorium. But that's just
right.
I don't know how broad. I can't compare that situation to the number of people in motels and give you a good sense of how much of that's the challenge. And of course, many people have a whole variety of challenges in their lives that leads them to lose their housing that's unrelated to the finances. So,
but I'm
sorry, I'm not gonna be able to answer that question with any degree of authority.
And we know so many of the issues, like everything from mental health to losing their jobs to all the issues of the pandemic are affecting this. I understand that. I just was curious.
I mean, yes. It is a good question. I think we're all sort of wondering, because we were somewhat giddy last year when we said we were going to end homelessness as we know it. We had an eviction moratorium.
Right.
We had tens of millions of dollars paying people's back rent and current rent, and we put all the money into converting these motels. and now we're being told homelessness is at an historic high. Something is not, there's something missing here.
Well, it'd be easy to get discouraged, but I think that one way to look at it is the problem would be so much worse if you hadn't supported and we hadn't done all of that. And also, when we were, and you were last June, developing these plans and allocating these resources, at that point, I don't know that anybody had and knew that the pandemic was going to go on as long as it did. So it's a deeper and broader impact than perhaps we all realized at that time.
Well, to go to our chair's added concern to mine is, I think it's sort of like our immigration challenge at the southern border. I think we really need to realize that driving homelessness, we need to go back. We need to hear from the Office of oh my God, I'm just punting Sarah.
OEO.
OEO, thank you. We need to understand I think we all sort of vaguely understand the root causes of why many people become homeless, but we need to solve those problems upstream, because dealing with the result of it is so it's so expensive and so challenging, and it would be much easier. I mean, not easier, nothing about this is easy, but it strikes me that we really, after this, need to start focusing more on reducing people getting to that point and affecting their lives before they get to that point, which many other committees work on, I know, but it underscores the need for us to work in anticipation of it getting to this point.
Yeah, certainly. But we do know that one of the underlying problems is the lack of supply of affordable housing. You've heard us talk about that over and over again over the years. So all of our intent, and I believe, is to deal with the immediate pressing needs of keeping people safe and sheltered and out of the motels and into permanent homes, at the same time that we address and use that funding, federal funding that's coming to us, in order to address that underlying problem as well. And I applaud Commissioner Hanford's leadership and the proposal by Governor Scott to dedicate a substantial amount of the ARPA funding towards housing capital. So in the previous stimulus bills, there has been quite a bit of funding for housing, but I think your committee realizes, and it might sound familiar when I say this, that most of that is gone for the purpose of emergency rental assistance and mortgage assistance and services, and maybe emergency vouchers for people. There has not to date been very much in the federal packages specifically to housing capital for bricks and mortar. We pushed and scraped and pulled and the eligibility guidelines around CRF in order to use some of that for housing capital. And since then, the state of California is doing the same, and a couple other states. Most states did not use CRF for housing capital. In the ARPA bill, there's hundreds of thousands for emergency rental assistance. There is $50 million for mortgage assistance. Your committee's talked about that before with Maura at VHFA. And it looks like there is about, at a much different scale and lower scale, maybe 8 or 9 million that'll come to Vermont that could be used for capital in new programs through something called the HOME program, which is a federal housing program that VHCB administers. So there you've got 8 or 9 million versus we're now up to like 350 million in emergency rental assistance and more for mortgage assistance. So I think what the governor has determined is that out of the flexible 1.05 billion, oh, there's Josh, he'll correct me if I've got this wrong here, but they're seeing that there's a need for more capital. And so that's the proposal that Josh has been describing this morning, capital from ARPA funds for a variety of different housing needs that we've all been talking to you about for a time. And VHCB, we want to play our part in that. I realize that there's probably going to be a discussion between the administration and the legislature around how that gets appropriated and, and at what pace and in what and what forms. But we are working closely with the department as well as the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, the Agency of Human Services, and the State Housing Authority. Knowing that the ARPA funding had lots of different programs for housing, and some can be used for multiple uses, we all wanted to get together and try to braid those together as strategically as possible to make the biggest impact possible. And actually, the House version of the FY22 budget, H439, which is now in your Senate Appropriations Committee, establishes a working group of those entities, the entities that are responsible for administering all these funds, to work together and come up with a plan that they want to see by the end of April, so that we can consider it as they're putting the final touches, hopefully the final touches on the budget. So when Josh was talking about we're already working on this or the groups are collaborating, it's within that context that we're doing it. So maybe I'll pause there for any questions, other than to say right now, I think the proposal is in broad outlines, and we'll be talking with Josh and our, the other housing funders and others around how they see the details of that working out.
Okay, Senator Rahm, you have your hand up.
I mean, that's my question. I just really wasn't satisfied, Josh. I think you're great, with the answer of like, when are we going to see this in writing? I think it needs to be extremely soon. And I really trust the ways that the housing community has leveraged dollars in the past, but there are communities that have been entirely left behind, and they need to know what you're going to do differently. I mean, you probably heard in the Mayor of Burlington's recent, speech on racial justice that 18 of all homeowners in Burlington identify as Black. So when I hear about the BIPOC program and ways of bringing people into permanent housing who have been left behind, I haven't seen enough in writing. I haven't seen who the new partners will be and how you'll do things differently to meet needs that you haven't met before. And I personally really need that to support any of this. So I think the question is when we're going to see more details, not if.
Well,
I guess, I hear what you're saying, Senator Rahm, and from my perspective, I don't think there has been a focus. So that's why we haven't seen results. Certainly my department has never had money to deploy to address homeownership from the state ever. So, we made a commitment, we had it in the VHIP proposal for down payment for, purchase and rehab. It has a commitment to work out how that should happen with players and partners. We've had several meetings with NAAC chapters around the state. They've asked for support of that program, and we have every intention of having them be the ones that tell us how to market this and how to use it. It is a marker that we need to make a commitment. I don't know that we will have, detailed designs in a week to show how this is going to work, because we need the input from folks on how to do it. Simple sort of, we can offer up to $50,000 per home as a subsidy for how you bring it online, to help you with the purchase of the land or to help you with the permitting. All that stuff's easy. We can give you that, but how it's going to meet those targets, how it's going to meet the goals has to be an ongoing plan and discussion that even if we wrote something up to you and gave it to you next week, I don't think that satisfies your goals. We need to have a check-in, a report, things that show that we're meeting the intent in order to make progress here, because this is newer for, I think, all of us. I haven't seen in my past work in Vermont in housing a call for this specifically. So this is new, and it needs to be developed collaboratively. I wish I had a better answer, but I don't have the answers of how it works. I have the goal of seeing it supported and reaching that a shared goal, but I'm not pretending that I have the program or the answers to make it work. So input from you, other groups, to tell us, include this action, include this benchmark. Please bring it all on. I guess I'm just fearful that we missed the moment by wanting the answers spelled out that we've not been good at getting you in the past. So if there's
I
ways,
guess I started
yeah.
this conversation with Sean, in December about what this program would look like. And my big question is still, why should you all get the money and not somebody else? I mean, who are you going to pass the money through to make this work, to reach populations that you haven't before? I don't see in ACCD the capacity to reach those populations directly and have built up trust to do this work well. So, how will that change, or why would we give you the money to be supporting BIPOC homeownership instead of another organization that has relationships within the BIPOC community?
And we would probably give the money to those groups to deliver it. I mean, we are a staff of 2. We don't build this projects. We depend on partners, and many of those partners have reached out. And I think we would run a program that solicits their proposals to make this work and be part of the conversation. I mean, one of the conversations that we've had with the NAACP chapters is how we can give them a piece of this to be the program partner that makes the connections, does the marketing, so they're delivering it, not us. So we want those proposals from those groups. That's a fact, and we can structure this so that delivery piece is done by trusted partners as defined by the community themselves. I think you're exactly right that we're not a trusted organizer of this or partner. So the groups that are, tell us who you want to us to work with, and who you want us to partner with, and who you want to give the money to.
But you also need to have oversight, as with any group that you subcontract to, whether, as we've gone through this whole pandemic and giving you money to then funnel to appropriate groups, you also then need to know that they're trustworthy. And I mean, but also you're still at the big picture. I mean,
Sure.
I haven't had time to flesh out, I think, yet a lot of this. And so I think it's important for us to help identify, and Keisha's right, we need to identify those groups that you can work with. But I don't think you've had the time yet to get to that level of detail. What you're talking about are the big goals, and then we need to flesh it out. That's our job here in our committee, to work with fleshing it out.
And the Home Builder program has that time, because we're really not spending the money to years 2 and 3. And we have to worry about these federal rules that are going to come with this money. Treasury hasn't even issued the guidance on this, but yet we have 45 days to submit applications on many of these programs that is already halfway finished. So they're going to be reissuing guidance and amending this as we go, but we have to have a commitment to spend the money in short order. And so we're all in this box, in this challenge. And the things we have to worry about are the overarching federal regulations that come with this, which Treasury hasn't released, but we're assuming NEPA, National Environmental Protection Act, we have to monitor. Davis-Bacon wage rates, other Section 3 requirements that we're used to doing, where they encourage low and moderate income businesses to be preference for bids. There's a whole bunch of other things overarching that would be our responsibility to ensure those are followed and we're meeting the requirements. But the on-the-ground partners that are the best to deliver and meet these sub-goals, like ensuring more opportunity for homeownership, a BIPOC community, we need those partners to do that work, and welcoming anyone to the table that wants to suggest who are the best ones to do that, because I'm not going to sit here and tell you who they are.
Right. So actually, Mr. Chair, may I ask a question about the timeline? Because Josh, this goes to our need, and we're being pressed to also work to identify ARPA money and where it's going to. I mean, what is your timeline? You just talked about 45 days. You have 45 days to do what? And you're presenting this on behalf of Vermont on how to spend this money and what's our input on this. So could you just talk about the timeline? Because I'm not all clear on that.
So a number of the housing pieces of ARPA have a 45-day limit to apply for the funds. So the $152 million that Vermont's going to get for rental assistance, the $50 million for mortgage assistance, some other homeless funds have this deadline which we're already halfway through, and they haven't issued an application yet or guidance. So what we have been working on with the Agency of Administration and some check-ins with Joint Fiscal on how they want to handle this is we're just submitting a letter to the Treasury saying Vermont plans to apply, consider this our application. Because we don't want to miss the deadline. We don't want to have, and maybe they'll consider that our application since they haven't released it. This is really challenging that they've put this deadline and don't have the guidance or an application. But we want our foot in the door to say, of course, we're applying and consider this our application, because we need to appropriate these funds and find who's going to distribute them before they're even going to give us the guidance. So that's the big picture challenge.
What is your deadline?
I'd have to go look. I think the bill was signed like March 11th or something. So we're already halfway into it. And, these discussions are happening daily. I mean, I think, Jen brought it up. There are working groups between all of the housing groups and AHS that we meet several times a week to just talk about the enormity of all this money and how to best be coordinated. And then there's internal groups within the administration that are looking at these deadlines related to the various acts and how to ensure we receive the money. And we're also talking with our other housing partners in other states that many are also scrambling to saying we haven't even acted on dime one of this money either. So that's probably just rambling that doesn't really help you understand. But
no, actually,
Josh, it might be helpful to make the distinction between categorical programs that are in ARPA, and then there's the big $1 billion to the state. So there are a number of really specific programs, rental assistance, mortgage assistance, and different things that will flow through a different process. And those are kind of called categorical grants. That's what JFO's talked about before. And they have very specific deadlines and application processes, which are just now becoming clear. Then there's the big $1 billion pot that there's a lot more flexibility around. We don't know how much flexibility around, and that's the piece that Josh and the governor have just framed out. And you've already framed out $650 million of that, or the House has in their budget.
right. So the categorical grants have these deadlines because we have to be working with these deadlines too. That's what I'm trying to clarify for our committee.
that's right. And that's the challenge. But, I think, I can't remember if it was this committee or House General, but Maura Collins and I both testified on the $50 million for mortgage assistance that it would be better if it was not appropriated, because we don't know the rules yet and how it works. But yet this clock is ticking. It's going to need to go through the Joint Fiscal AA1 process again in order for it to be stood up and managed, because they have to start planning for this and getting things up and ready to launch a program that can't really wait until it goes through the full appropriation process. And so it was a very defined program with set limits and set rules. Many states have just said, this is how we're running it. And they're just developing a program based on the legislation, not the guidance already. And so these 45-day rules that I'm talking about for an application, which we're halfway through already. That's not to be confused. The only nexus here is we have all this rental assistance, $352 million to spend over the next 2 years, but we don't have any place for people to live to use that rental assistance. So we need a commitment to build the housing units as soon as possible in order to take advantage of that rental assistance.
So I think I want to move us along here. I do want to say one thing about overarching goals here that I hope will be part of any proposal on build out, and that's the long-term goal of affordability. I mean, I've lived through the years where we had 20 or 30-year federal subsidies for projects in Burlington like Northgate, hundreds and hundreds of units that went to the private market after that period of time, and people were scrambling like crazy how to preserve that housing and have people not be evicted. So I'm hoping that whatever comes with this money to make housing more affordable also has some element of perpetual affordability to it. Otherwise, we're going to find ourselves uh, dealing with this issue all over again, and in some ways kicking the can down the road for 10 years or 20 years or something like that. So Jen was about to talk, I think, about where VHCB fits in the process of what Josh describes as we've had all these projects ready to go. What does that mean, ready to go? I'm assuming it doesn't mean shovel ready to go. There's a lot more steps before we get to that point, but could you talk about that a little bit?
Certainly. So we always are aware of the pipeline of projects that that affordable housing developers have and are waiting for us to get enough funding to be able to help them advance. And it's typically in the range of $35 to $40 million worth of housing development all over the state. So one of the, and those are in various states of readiness, but they manage that based on what funding they think that is going to be available to them. So one of the elements of what Josh was just describing was to go ahead and say, okay, money's available, so let's bring all those projects forward. And that's the pipeline, the multifamily rental piece of what he was saying. And the chart that he showed you has it phased out over a couple years, because those are the type of projects that typically we use a small amount of state funding, VHCB funding, usually as the first money in, and it's almost like the seed money. And then the developers have to bring in all the other resources, whether it's federal housing tax credits or, you know, local fundraising or CDBG grants, in order to make that package of funding, or capital stack as we refer to it, in order for those to proceed. So that gets to one of your questions earlier on, Senator Sirach, and you had asked whether the state money usually comes in at the end or the beginning. So VHCB is usually one of the first funders. And in that way, honestly, we can help drive the priorities in location and you know, levels of affordability. And if we put money into it, it's permanently affordable.
So,
So there's a distinction, I think, you know, that Secretary of Transportation Buttigieg used the other day, which I think is informing our thinking. And then that's the distinction between shovel ready, which might be the motel projects that need to happen really quickly, and shovel worthy. And those are like, what are the projects we really want to see as good, permanent, long-term investments that might take a little bit longer to put together, but are in good locations, a mix of incomes, you know, solid energy efficiency, and they're doing outreach to disadvantaged communities. So those might be more the shovel-worthy projects, and it's going to take a few years for those to come together. And it's really great that the ARPA money is, it gives us, you know, 4 years instead of 6 months. I don't know if that gets at part of your question.
it does. It's very helpful. So if we're looking at expedited, affordable, mixed income housing, that it might be slightly different than where you direct your money now, but there's $20 million in the chart for FY22. That's $20 million of ARPA funds above and beyond your usual base appropriation, above and beyond any of the money that was put in the Budget Adjustment Act, or I don't know if there's some money in this new H315. But so this $20 million would be in some ways your traditional, a bump in your traditional projects where you would hear a presentation. I assume you don't give the money out unless there's some likelihood or the money is contingent upon some likelihood of this stacking going on at a later date, but projects that look promising that they can get the other financing. That's what we're talking about in the $20 million of expedited, affordable, mixed housing.
I believe so, but I would look to Josh to confirm that. But when VHCB underwrites a project, we almost underwrite it like a bank. We review the pro formas, development budgets, design, permitting status, and all those kinds of things, and likelihood that they're going to get the rest of the funding before our board will agree to fund it.
Yeah, I
So-
mean, I can just confirm that, the thinking here behind this chart and this mix is that it relies on VHCB and VHFA and frankly, moving much of this money to both of them to help distribute. So it's going to come with all those affordability overviews. It's going to come with all of that underwriting, smart location, all of that. And that number in the pipeline, isn't just pulled out. There was some information from VHFA and VHCB about what we already know of. And 99% of all these projects have to go to three sources: VHCB, VHFA, and CDBG to get funded. And what this allows is for it to happen and not have to go. Each of those have one board meeting a year and 3 years to line up the funding. We can shortcut that and do it all in year one with that $20 million, that number of units, and it represents the traditional affordable housing, multifamily apartments. It also represents some opportunity in mobile home parks to do infill, clean up vacant lots that have been left behind and place, new mobile homes there, as well as some farm worker housing needs that have been identified later. And, in each of these, to Senator Rahm's point, there are experts in those fields that need to be brought in to make sure those investments are done the right way and are helping the right people. It's not DHCD sitting up on high telling people how to do that. It just accelerates what we already know exists under the pipeline mix and really moves it up. It's not shortcutting any of the processes or the good locations and the other considerations that are here.
Okay. So I want to just touch on the rapid housing for the homeless. I mean, the $90 million in FY22 is probably the biggest number on this entire chart in 1 year. This is a major increase in terms of what you've already asked for and received. Is that not correct? I mean, is it just what is the cause that there's just many more homeless people now than to get into permanent housing than there was before?
Josh could maybe speak to the thinking behind the number, and then I can tell you what kind of proposals and need VHCB is seeing.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is directly from, AHS, their various divisions that are, dealing with the general assistance program and looking at what they need to be able to serve those families that are in these emergency housing situations. This is the number of units they need to help solve this problem in the next 12 to 18 months. Some of this work does add on to what, VHCB has already started. I know that in talking with Jen and Gus that, some of the new money that's in various CRF or, other sources to sort of continue the work they did last year, and Jen can speak more detail than this, but there's been letters of interest and whatnot submitted for projects already that exceed what they have been allocated. So we already have a number of projects. I don't know what that exact unit count is, but this is a source where we need to give the okay to those projects and more soon. Otherwise, we're going to spend $90 million just on shelter over the next 10 months with the folks that are in motels anyway. So we want to use that to build the housing rather than pay for shelter.
Okay, so in adding to that, Jen, does what you see out there and what you've experienced so far, are you capable of even spending that kind of money, finding locations for sale? What's the how real is that number?
So we, in H315, which I think is up for action on the Senate floor this afternoon, maybe, and you would agree to the House's proposal of further amendment, there's $10 million of from what's left over in CRF to VHCB to continue that those motel type or emergency housing type projects. So in anticipation of that and contingent upon that final approval, of course, we requested letters of interest and let people know that it looked like we were going to have another $10 million to do that kind of project that we did last year with the CRF. We received 26 million in requests, and we're reviewing those applications now. And one project alone that would create 74 units was 15 million. So we're not going to be able to do that when we don't have enough funding. And again, people are very aware of how much money they have when they decide whether or not to put in an application because it's work and they need to get site control and those kinds of things. So so to get to the point is that, yes, we do see both a tremendous need for all of this, and we do see the potential. Now, I mean, anytime things change, there are different kind of implications. So of course, the fact that motel owners know that the state's kind of interested in this is meaning the housing developers have to be pretty darn savvy in their negotiations with owners too, because the owners think there's federal and state money behind it. The price goes up, but we have to purchases need to be based on appraised value. So in most instances, that's working out. So long-winded answer to say, there's more need than we have funding to provide for. And I think 90 million, especially if it's not in 6 months. I mean, we spent 33 million in 6 months. And we have 4 years to do this for this particular type of project.
Yeah, and I don't know whether the way this is broken out on this chart, it looks like there's $90 million at least appropriated in FY22. I don't know whether there'll be carry forward funds for the next 3 years of that $90 million, or whether it's envisioned in this case because of the urgency to get it all out the door in FY22. But
Well, we'll have a year, which is better than the 6 months. And
That's
so we should be able to particularly given how much you've lined up ahead of time, will some of those applications, Jen, be able to be punted into this next round of funding so that they could be considered for the 90 million if they don't fit into the 10?
We'd like to try to keep those possible, yes. And that's what we've talked about internally, that they're the ones that we would prioritize for this 10, but then we're asking the applicants, like, can you hang on to this potential because there may be more funding coming.
Right.
About the 90 million, you would appropriate it in the first year, and usually we award or commit all the funding you give to us each year. If it's $90 million, we don't necessarily have to spend that all in 1 year. And one of the things that we really want to be thinking about, and a good one of the other important and good things about the fact that there's not a federal deadline on this money that's so short, is that we don't want to just be buying whichever motel somebody can buy. We want to be creating permanent homes in good locations that can become more mixed income housing over time, that can have access to services and transportation, and to be in communities where people most need them. So it's a balance of wanting to do things quickly, but making sure these are good long-term investments.
Right. And support all our other goals, our smart growth.
Yeah.
Our
Yes.
downtown.
I wonder if I could go back to a question that Senator Rahm asked Josh a little bit ago. And there's so much more work that we need to do to make sure that disadvantaged and BIPOC communities have access to these resources. I take heart in the fact that our housing groups, it is through affordable housing that you can most often reach folks. And I know in Champlain Housing Trust, and most of their apartments and homes are ones that the state has supported with VHCB funding. 37% of their renters are people of color, and I think maybe 13 or 15% of their homeowners are people of color. So there's a disparity right there, and we need to do a lot more. But they're working with AELV and the USCRIA and NAACP, and that's work that we want to support them in doing and building that capacity. So like Josh said, we as funders need to provide the administrative framework and basically help translate federal dollars and regulation into something that people at the community level can use to meet people's needs. But in doing that, we're going to need to strengthen and build new partnerships with people who can do more marketing and outreach along the lines of the project we just funded in Winooski, which is going to be home ownership units and with special and targeted marketing to disadvantaged communities. And we're hoping, because it's in Winooski, a more diverse group of homeowners can access those new homes.
Right.
So, okay.
Can I
Thank
say
you.
one more thing, Michael? Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
The housing community, along with a lot of others, really needs to start disaggregating people of color. The experience for Bhutanese, Nepali folks accessing homeownership has been incredibly different than the experience for Somali Bantu folks. Anti-Black racism keeps Black Americans from accessing capital and homeownership. It is a very unique experience. And so we really have to look, are we doing great helping people of color, but not Black Vermonters? And that is a unique situation. So I would love to start hearing you all disaggregate those populations because they're not monolithic.
Okay.
Understood.
I had a question. Do you have the track record you have on the homelessness issue, the conversion of hotels to or motels? Do you have a cost per unit at this point? How much it's costing per unit to convert?
Gosh, I'm going to give you a number and then I'd like to come back if I got it wrong. But I think with the CRF units, it was about 150,000 a unit. So these tend to be acquisitions of smaller units with a lighter level of rehab. So that's much different than what it costs to build a new single family home.
Are they essentially studios at that point? Like not one bedrooms or?
They are studios, ones, and sometimes 2 bedrooms, but mostly studios and ones.
Right. And yeah, and they're kind of an interesting affordable in between the VHIP 30,000 roughly, or 24,000 per unit, or I guess total cost 60,000. That's our lowest end getting units back into use. And this is a middle ground, and then the $300,000 cost of a new home or a whole new unit. Isn't that your average for a new unit is 300,000?
Yeah, it's getting close to that now. Yes. And I think it's a whole,
We have
Josh and I could go back and forth on this for a while, but it's a different product. It's a different outcome. It's a highly energy efficient, permanently affordable housing that's probably got services built in, and
right. But we're
and so I think we need to keep doing both things.
All 3 things. I mean,
all 3 things.
What we've done in this discussion today has gone from VHIP to this sort of, I don't know what we call this, the conversions to new units. I mean, it's a range of investment and outcomes, but all new housing.
I wish there was time to show you pictures, but there were two highly zero energy modulars that were placed on site with CRF funding just yesterday. So that's about 160,000 to get sited and placed, but that's another model.
Right. Are those in the Addison County project you talked to us about?
Previously, these 2 happened to be in Hardwick.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'd argue we also need to incentivize market rate construction of home ownership, period, because it's not happening unless you're asking someone to build $1 million home, and we're not getting the middle income housing. And I've talked to Sandrine at CVOEO about some of the shared equity models, and that sometimes is also concerning for some folks that aren't that trusting of government over long term, that they want to be able to buy an affordable home that they own outright and have an ability for upward mobility and to be able to sell. And that form of home that opportunity is becoming increasingly rare in Vermont, and we need to sort of spark that sort of development, subsidize some of those costs that are resulting in only homes that wealthy people can afford.
Right. It's a big problem. That's a big challenge.
A couple of final questions for Jen. If you could talk about your observations on the labor market out there to absorb all this new money. And in terms of homelessness, you know, Earhart's not with us anymore, but he would be the first to remind us of the three-legged stool. And we had a lot of money going into services to match the capital in the other funding. Is there a need for service money, and is that being asked for? We're hearing there's little in the governor's plan that deals with, mental health needs and other human needs. I don't know that, ARPA money would be appropriate for that, but is there an attempt anywhere that you see to keep that parallel track on services going?
So first to the
I can ask
construction.
both of you that question, okay?
So first to the construction, we see some of the same challenges you've already identified. I think what I would add is that the affordable housing developers and contractors, they work together quite a lot. So I think there's a degree of familiarity, and I think that our experience is that the contractors, once they know affordable housing project is going, they like to work on those because they know it's frankly going to be well done, well designed, and the funding's going to be there. So they are often receptive to those proposals. That doesn't mean, we're going to see price increases for sure, and maybe they're going to be, the labor, it's not immune from the labor shortages or issues that other industries are, but I do think there is that advantage going for it. And now I've forgotten the second question.
Second one, services.
Oh, services. So, I think we will probably always be at a point where one leg of the stool is shorter than the others. But I think you're absolutely right that we're going to need services. Until this conversation, it was the capital leg that was short. If the legislature and governor agree to use a lot of ARPA money for housing capital, then we're going to need to attend to the services, the services leg. Right now, it looks like the rental assistance leg is pretty good. But I think that's a really important thing to be mindful of.
Yeah, I just want to add that the rental assistance leg in the ARPA 1, the $200 million for rental assistance, up to 10% of that could be for housing stability services. In the ARPA 2, $152 million, up to 15% of that can be used for housing stability services. So we have more support services than we've ever had as well, but we want to use those supports to get for people to be in housing, not to be in motels. And so we need to build the housing. I keep going back to this capital. This is probably going to be our only chance unless the transportation, the infrastructure bill, the Biden bill passes, which that could be years before that happens. So I think we have to take this opportunity we have and do something with it to take advantage of the rental assistance and support that we've always had a harder time in finding that's available because of ERAP 1 and 2 that they're being called right now. And those housing support services, we have RFPs coming in, RFP out with proposals coming in from groups all across the state, including some folks that represent BIPOC communities and others to provide these services, make sure translation languages are there. And this is a much better opportunity than we had with CRF money with the short time frame, and we didn't have a lot to carve out for these needs. We have the resources to carve out for these needs. Treasury changed their guidance. We were under the first set of rules, only 10% was available for both admin and housing stability services. They just refined that and made 10% for admin plus 10% for housing stability services. So we're gonna have more in this area for the next 2 years than we've ever had. So I think that the timing is right to make, an impact here that we've never had a chance to
Okay.
do.
And some of these federal ARPA sources can be used for a variety of things. Some can be used for capital or services or rental assistance. And so that's part of why the House asked a group to come together and figure out who's going to do what with
Right.
which source.
Well, I want to thank you all very much, especially on short notice. We need to get our feet wet in this. We're not going to have much time to respond with a legislative response. So we need to devote a lot of our attention on this at this point.
Right.
I'm gonna we have to do, the vice chair and I have to do some scheduling for next week, but we are gonna have Joan Golson coming in at 11:30 for 25 minutes to talk about the new economic recovery development proposals from the governor. So I know it's a break from our usual schedule, but I hope you all can come back at 11:30 and we'll break no later than 12.
Yes.
And now we have about 15 minutes for another break if you'd like.
And Randy, could I, after we're done with scheduling, could I give you a ring a little later?
Yep.
I'd left you a message. Okay, great.
Oh, you have? Okay, I haven't seen it, but yeah, I'm
I
happy I'm here.
left you a phone message.
Oh, okay.
So if that's okay, everybody can sign off and